In order to combat that, the best thing we can do is make sure that we have less power. That's actually what you're saying to me.
And
Andrew Wilson debates this Libertarian Christian on what's a better form of government: a Christian nationalist a sole Christian government, or this libertarian government where you don't yuck my yum. Let's see how this debate goes down.
Or should he have the right to block it off at the expense of everybody else in the town down from the river?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of libertarians come up with different answers for this. Some people try to say that there should be some kind of easement for things like that. Other people say that water or like natural resources like that shouldn't be, things that people should be morally encouraged to to own or use stuff like that. It's important to note that while this is a real issue that there's not a perfect solution from a libertarian worldview, I don't think that there's a perfect solution from the from a state worldview either, because corporations can still do this and do environmental damage all the time, and they just pay off politicians and law enforcement and pass regulations to get away with their various.
There is a perfect solution from a corporate perspective or a state perspective. They go in with guns and they unblock it. They arrest him and they throw him in prison, and that's the end of it. It's a perfect solution.
Yeah. Well, I think what libertarians would say is that rather than, relying on force, which there are some libertarians who say that there can be force used in that sort of instance, but that rather what they would try to encourage in a more libertarian legal order society would be contract law and things like that, which you'd have market forces incentivizing against people doing that. So you would set up a system that tries
I know, but he just really doesn't want to, Jacob. He just really doesn't. He doesn't want to play ball, Jacob. He doesn't want to. And it's his shit. He has the cross-generational claim, as you just said. He's been homesteading the land. It's his, Jacob. It's his land. He can just do that. Can't he?
If there's water running through his land and he's really like homesteaded everything around the land, you could construct a scenario where there was no contract. I mean, listen, prevention's always better than cure. And I think that a libertarian free market society does better in preventing these problems than the state does. And again, you can say there's a perfect solution of we take men with guns and go in there, but
that's the price. Well, wait, that solution works every single time, doesn't it?
Except that it doesn't get in practice. Again, if you're saying
in practice, it seems to work better than anything that you've proposed. In practice, in fact, every single situation that I look at,
states and governments are like the biggest polluters in the world.
Yeah, maybe so. But when it comes down to enforcement of whatever policy is, they seem to be able to enforce it fine. So you can argue that they make some stupid policies. Sure, everybody makes stupid policies. Libertarian governments would make stupid policies and have made stupid policies.
I'm not prescribing.
But ultimately, what I'm saying to you is that, yes, the state is quite effective at just going in with guns and saying, no, unblock this waterway. And the residents down there are now going to get the goods and services that they need on this waterway. They seize it via eminent domain. And Jacob, that seems like it's optimal to me. That seems like a way more optimal system than, we'll come up with a bunch of bizarre, nuanced contract nonsense. You can't actually make it
expedient.
Yeah, but Jacob,
I don't think it's necessarily.
I need to hear the argument for why it's more immoral.
Well, I think that you have to have a larger view, a lower time preference of evaluating these situations. Because when we create centralized institutions of power, there might be immediate payoffs and things that you would count on the good side of the ledger, but over a long period of time, what are the trade-offs, right? I mean, I kind of take that Thomas Sowell approach to politics, and I'm not a libertarian absolutist, although I like the video you were listening to of me from a couple of years ago today when your debate prep. Back then, I was probably more of in like my libertarian cage stage. Like I was full Rothbard this and Hayek that and all that. And I try to take more of a pragmatic view at this point in my political theory. I think, listen, I think both agree that neither of our views are going to create a utopia that prevent some sort of problems. But if I think
not trying to say that mine does, I'm trying to say that my view though is superior.
Well, and I would
I'm going to
disagree. I think
explain. Yeah, I know that's what we're arguing about.
If we're talking about trade-offs, which I like the Thomas Sowell quote that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. I think the trade-offs of a libertarian legal order are far preferable to the trade-offs of a
that's nice, but I need to hear a moral argument for why it is that the government shouldn't just come in, shouldn't just unblock it, shouldn't just let the water flow.
All right, I'll give you an answer. If we create a monopoly of force so powerful that it can make decisions like that against people's property, then the trade-offs of that are what we see around us. We see that free markets are completely destroyed and subverted. We've created an institution.
Well, no, now you're reversing descriptive and prescriptive again. You're saying because it is this way, then that prescriptively means that it shouldn't be that way. That makes no sense. You're saying that if we create a monopoly on force with some type of entity, that means they have to then use it to be oppressive? It doesn't seem that way to me. It seems like you could have an absolute force monopoly that only did good things, right?
I mean, in sure, theoretically.
Sure. So the thing is that if we could,
I could also say in my theoretical libertopia that everyone just contractually agrees to not. So I mean, like we can both say, well, this doesn't have to go bad, but we could just look empirically and say most of the time when we centralize power, this is what happens.
No, it doesn't seem to go bad when you centralize power. In fact, it seems to go bad when you polarize populations rather than having something which is a central theme inside the population. In fact, I would say that if your population has a single religion that is monopolistic, that your society's better. I would say that if your society is homogenous and monopolistic that way, that it's better. I would say that diversity is not a strength. I would say that having these kind of core buildup of powers is a good thing, Jacob.
Yeah, again, I think empirically, let's look at here at America, right? We started out as a constitutional republic. We were very small, very decentralized in terms of the government. As that has grown, things that you and I care about, right? Like having, I think you and I would be fellow travelers when it comes to wanting to see an increase of Christianity in our society. We see that as
you wouldn't want some monopoly like that. They'd have the monopoly on force, Jacob.
Well, I'm talking culturally, spiritually. And,
but they would then Christians would have a monopoly on force. You don't want that.
They didn't. Christians didn't have a monopoly on force.
Oh, really?
You're talking about in the. I mean. Yes.
Are you sure, Jacob?
It was the majority. All right, let me imagine.
Yeah.
It was a majority of Christians when America was founded. So yes, the institution of force that did exist was
Christians.
By Christians.
That's right.
But they didn't have this giant centralized power, right?
Yes, they did.
I'm not using.
Hey, wait. What do you mean they didn't? The president of who's the commander in chief of the United States Armed Forces from the inception of our nation, Jacob?
Right, it was the president.
It's the president of the United States. He is in full command of the entire armed forces of America, who are all Christians, a centralized authority over all of the force. Hang on, Jacob, wait. Over all of the force of the United States, one guy held the keys. One.
Right. And the anti-federalists were right. We should have never signed the Constitution, but that's a whole other different rabbit hole. Compared to what, right? So yes, in the abstract, that's still more government than I want. But compared to a lot of the governments that existed around that time, compared to the government we have today, it was much smaller, much more decentralized.
Yeah, that's because there wasn't as many people. First of all, there wasn't as many people. We were living in basically coastal areas because people settle where there's water. Okay, that's why. There wasn't very many people. Most of this landmass had not been conquered at that point. That's why you had a smaller government. But as far as representation goes, right? No, there was really quite a bit of bureaucracy, which was going on during not only the founding of the nation, but during the 13 colonies. There was bureaucracy all over the place. The government was absolutely stuffed to the brim with bureaucrats, in fact. And you had state religions on top of that. Every single colony had a state religion. And then post-constitutional ratification, they still had state religions. It was bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy. I don't know how you can say that this was some libertarian. It wasn't. In fact, one of the first things they did was the Whiskey Rebellion, right? Very first thing they did was they went ahead and they grabbed the militia and used force in order to make sure that people were paying their taxes like they were supposed to. Very first thing they did. We've always had a monopoly on force in the United States. Arguably, it's always worked extremely well as long as you have moral people who are in the positions of power.
Sure, if you have moral people, that helps, but how long does that last? And I would say that the American experiment where it went wrong was it centralized power too much. Now, a Christian majority was able to keep that power relatively in check for a time, but I would say, and this was part of what I got into in my response video to you, was that I think the problem is that when you centralize power too much, what inevitably happens is that the incentive structure of that centralized power is going to work against Christianity. It's actually going to subvert the church and Christian institutions, and I think that's exactly what has happened in our country, in our society.
You mean Protestantism?
Listen, I'm
hang on. What would be the central authority?
Self-loathing Protestant.
Yeah,
so
what would be the authority, the self-governing authority of the United States when it came to Christianity, Jacob?
Sorry, I don't understand.
The governing authority, the governing body for religion, Christianity inside of the United States. That's not Catholicism. That's not Orthodoxy, is it?
No.
Now, so it could be possible as well that you're drawing a correlate that doesn't even exist here. The correlate being that as we centralize power, that this is going to go against Christianity. My argument back to you is no, as long as you are not centralizing power with Protestants who then fracture off into 40,000 different denominations. It's the fact that they are not centralized. It's the fact that they're not centralized, actually, which destroys their power. Here's my argument to you. My argument is right this second, if there was one single solid church, which was a Protestant church, let's just call it, for the purpose of this mental exercise, the Church of Martin Luther, okay? Conservatives would then be in charge of the most powerful institution in the United States, which would be that church. Not liberals, not progressives, conservatives would be. And that is what happens when actually you fracture away your power, is that evil men and progressives come in and they seize your institutions and they centralize it against you. You cannot actually defend against the powerful without yourself being powerful. And that you have to have some form of collectivism to do that. In this case, I say Christianity is a great one.
You know, sometimes when I watch these debates, I try to find I'll see the patterns and I see the underlying, sometimes where their arguments stem from the root, if you will, like where it all starts and where it all begins. And it seems like, in my opinion, from what I could see, is that Andrew Wilson seems, he said before that he is sick and tired of, he hates, liberals, he hates lefty progressives, I should say. He hates lefty progressives and stuff like that. So I think that he really doesn't like the fact that they, took over power and they've influenced our culture for the negative, for the worse and not for the better. And so I think that he wants this homogeny with just a lot of people in my comments say that he's for a monarchy, like he wants a monarchy, and I've heard Andrew Wilson praise monarchies. I don't know if that's what he actually wants for the United States, though. I'm just saying I haven't heard him outright say I would like a monarchy for the United States, but it seems like he wants this Christian nation pretty much, which I'm for, by the way. I'm for a Christian nation, but I don't know if Andrew Wilson wants to use that force to enforce a Christian nation, make people be Christians. Real quick, going back to that example earlier about the guy cutting, his hypothetical, the guy cutting off the water. Well, why couldn't the government work out a deal with that guy? Okay, we're going to work out a deal. Yeah, I know that at the end of the day, the guy could just be like, nope. And then maybe the government might have to use force. I don't know. But I mean, I think ideally the government might want to work out a deal with that guy or something, work something out. I don't know. This is interesting conversation, by the way, with this Libertarian Christian. What do you guys think about this so far? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you're liking it so far. That'll be helping me out a lot. Let's continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think Christianity is a bulwark against oppressive regimes, and that's why oppressive regimes try to subvert the church historically. I don't know. Yeah, but I don't think that Catholicism or Eastern Orthodox churches have exactly protected their societies from their governments becoming tyrannical either. So I'm not sure.
No. Wait, they have. And that's why the first thing the communists do to the Orthodox Church is what?
Well, they
what did they do?
They persecute them.
No, so they took them all. They took the Orthodox czar out, and they murdered him and his entire family, the Bolsheviks did. And then they went through and systematically slaughtered all of the Orthodox which existed in the East that they could possibly get their hands on, exactly because they were a powerful central church, which
So
could
you're saying
stop,
it wasn't good
which
enough
could
to
stop
stop.
communists.
So you're saying that, you're
Just
saying
because they
failed.
lost, just because they lost doesn't mean that the idea that centralizing force, if they had some sort of like standing army or some sort of warrior class, let's say, they might have been able to stand a much larger chance. They only had a centralized power with the political class. That in and of itself is still a great bulwark. They at least had something. We don't have anything. We're just literally ripe for the plucking, bro. We're ripe for the plucking.
You won't get much disagreement from me that Protestantism is largely a failure in terms of being a bulwark against these things. So I wouldn't have much pushback with you there, other than I just haven't managed to convince myself yet of Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. So, but that's not the purpose of what we're here for today. I think that, these are all gradients, right? So, I mean, the American experiment might have lasted longer if it wasn't Protestantism, if it was maybe majority Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. But I still think that the incentive structures of a monopoly of power like that, and again, I think this is biblically based. This is essentially the warning that God gave through Samuel to the Israelites when they asked for a king, because in the book of Judges, they still had government, but it was decentralized. And when they were like, hey, we want a king, we want a centralized authority to solve our problems for you, God wasn't like, finally, this is what I've been waiting for you guys to ask for. He was like, no, first of all, you're rejecting me as your king. And he's going to take from you. Actually, it's really crucial. He says he's going to take 10% from you. And that's really significant because 10% is what's owed to God. So he's like, he's going to be it's going to be idolatry. He's going to
but I mean, so what? There's counter
mine.
examples to all of that, including judges. Why do we have judges? What were judges?
Well, that was an example of governance.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I
what
think,
were they? Though?
Listen, there are
hang on. What were judges? What were they?
Well, some of them were like military leaders, and some of them were.
They were a centralized. They were a centralized authority.
Andrew.
Yeah, I'm saying they were a centralized authority. All of these. Hang on. Not only were they a centralized authority, but they were a fantastic centralized authority, and what they were able to do is bring actual justice. What happens is when you whittle away at the government with your stupid libertarian idealism, what you do is you actually destroy centralized power for conservatism. And I'm going to give you an example in real time of how that happens and occurs. You ever hear of the fairness doctrine?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, this is perhaps before your time. But in the 1990s, you may not know this, but the conservatives had taken over all of national radio, all of it, every bit of it.
No, I know this. Yeah.
Yeah, and the liberals came in and said, oh, wait, we want this to be fair, blah, 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 blah. We need more airtime. We need more. It's not fair that conservatives have a monopoly on media. None of that's fair. It was libertarians who whittled away at conservative resistances, saying, no, we should have more of a battle of the ideas. We should have more of the other side's voices coming in here and speaking. We should have more of that. They were whittled away at the conservative power base. Libertarians are solely responsible for the erosion of conservatism inside of the United States because they claim that we're not allowed to have central power. And if we don't have it, the progressives will take it anyway. That's the flaw in your argument. Progressives will take it whether you want them to or not. Conservatives may listen to you, but they have no way to fight back if you don't let them have central power. They can't do it.
It's a lot harder for them to take power if it's not there in the first place, if it's decentralized. Now, you can look at this at different levels, right? So judges
responsible for the erosion of conservatism inside of the United States because they claim that we're not allowed to have central power. And if we don't have it, the progressives will take it anyway. That's the flaw in your argument. Progressives will take it whether you want them to or not. Conservatives may listen to you, but they have no way to fight back if you don't let them have central power. They can't do it.
It's a lot harder for them to take power if it's not there in the first place, if it's decentralized. Now, you can look at this at different levels, right? So judges, if you go to those specific tribes and areas, then there'd be centralization for a time or in a specific region for a specific dispute. And so I'm not like there are some wacky libertarians who say we shouldn't have any rules or any hierarchies, or even if you have a local governance, that's oppressive. And I'm not going there. Like I said, my views have evolved over the last couple of years. And so I'm okay with decentralized government that at the local level can actually be pretty active. In fact, some libertarians
Nope, still a bad idea.
would question my libertarian credentials, because I think at the local level, not only can government be a little bit more hands-on, but I think that the churches should be a big part of that.
Yeah. So aren't universities decentralized?
I mean, some universities, a lot of them get
No, they're
public funding.
they're decentralized.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a because I mean, a lot of them are connected, right?
Okay,
Like
well, explain how they're centralized, how they're a central position of power other than the soft power that they wield. That's their power, right? But they're not a centralized form of. So, in other words, can universities send armed men over to enforce their will?
Well, no, but they're almost
No.
like they're just an arm of the bureaucratic leftist progressive.
Well, then so is
state at this point.
everything. That's the thing, though, is that this is a problem when you say decentralized power. Try to understand how illogical it is from my perspective, what you're saying. Here's what you're saying. Andrew, inside of society, there are hundreds of millions of people whose ideology is that the state must seize control of everything possible and destroy all religion in order to free mankind from itself and give them a stateless society where we all live for each other. Hundreds of millions of people believe this ideology. In order to combat that, the best thing we can do is make sure that we have less power. That's actually what you're saying to me.
And
yeah, and it's retarded.
How would that combat these people?
if they're, I mean, if you have, it's easy to hijack institutions where the ability to tax, the ability to seize property, the ability to conscript, and the monopoly of law over a giant landmass with millions of people, when that already exists, it's easy for these leftists to come in and wield those against us, wield those against the church, wield those against the values that you and I would mostly agree with.
It's not easy. It's not actually easy for them to do this unless libertarian ideology gets in there and says to them things like, you should not wield force in government for ethics. You should not wield law against the citizens to enforce ethical standards. Rather, people should be able to do whatever they want as long as they're not aggressing on other people. You create this open back door for power to seize your institutions, because what happens is moral men act in the way that you're prescribing. Immoral men refuse to act in the way that you're prescribing. And so what they do is they seize power of those institutions, and you let them right in through the front door. Instead of recognizing this ideology will not go away, the only way to successfully combat the guy on the playground who has the biggest fist is to make sure that you can pound him harder, right?
Yeah, I just don't agree with that characterization of how we got here. Like, I've heard it sounds similar to like Michael Knowles said when he was on Timcast, where he's like, "Oh, libertarians duped the conservatives, and this is why we're in the mess we're in today." And I disagree with that. Like, conservatives were hijacked by like the Buckleyites and the neocons, who they weren't trying to you mean government small.
You mean progressive libertarians. Those are progressive libertarians.
They're not though. I mean,
yes, they were.
Them libertarians. That's just like that's making the word libertarian meaningless. If it
describes when you make
people and people like
when
me.
you make an egalitarian, when you make the argument, the pro argument for egalitarian systems, for equity between human beings and egalitarianism, essentially you are moving towards a libertarian paradigm. Libertarians have to concede to some form of egalitarianism and some form of equity. Otherwise, none of your shit's going to work. You have to bake in the assumption, for instance, that people can, sign these contracts, that they can live inside of these societies without there being a threat of force. My argument and contention is that no, they can't, and that all it takes is a single man to say, no, we want their shit. And now you're right for the plucking. You're right for the plucking. That's it. That's the end of it. It's done.
So this is where we'll have some crossover, like I alluded to earlier, because I actually think that there's some truth to what you're saying, and I think a lot of libertarians need to learn this lesson. So actually, like I come from like I'm friends with Dave Smith, and I'd say I'm like a Dave Smith style libertarian, and Dave often says that conservatives need to learn a libertarian lesson, and libertarians need to learn a conservative lesson. And I actually think that libertarians are misguided if they think that their ideas can ever come close to reality. I don't even think listen, like the libertarians who are thinking we're going to have some kind of stateless society need to wake up. There's a lot of people in you're watching this video of me earlier today, and I was talking back then in real time when it was happening, and I didn't understand their criticisms at that point. People like from my world, Pete Quinones, Matt Erickson, guys like CJ Engel, who are basically leaving libertarian movement to kind of move more into sort of like your territory. And the reason being that a lot of libertarians are living in fantasy land, basically living in what they would call Ancapistan in their head. And at the time, I kind of didn't realize their point. But over the last couple of years, I've kind of come to see that there's a lot of truth to what they're saying. And I think libertarians need to actually grow up a little bit and realize that, hey, we need to work in the real world. I'm not envisioning that in my lifetime that even if all the libertarians magically work together, we're going to have some kind of perfect libertopia come in. But I do think that the answer is still not ultimately down the path of centralizing power. And I would say that the only way that we're going to ultimately
you
fight
don't
back
want a
against
centralized power for religion.
I want a centralized power in terms of a cultural force.
Just going back a little bit to what Jacob said. I completely agree about libertarians need to grow up a little bit. That whole thing right there, nothing but straight up facts and truth. Libertarians lost me when they go on about their taxation as theft crap. It's not listen, obviously everyone hates paying taxes. No one likes paying fucking taxes. Who likes paying fucking taxes? Oh yeah, you're going to work hard for this money, just give a portion of it away to the government? Yeah, fuck that. Obviously it sounds like shit, but we kind of need taxes. We kind of need it. There's no other system that could replace it that's viable. I've read theories well, the corporations could play, well, the businesses, if they want their roads there, they could build it themselves. Yeah, okay. If you want to the privatization of roads and stuff's a horrible idea. When we see, for example, when we privatized free speech with social media and stuff like that, how well did that go? All it takes is for someone that built a road to be yeah, I don't want anyone from this political association driving on it. And you could figure out ways to fucking block people from driving on it. Just find them. Because you have to pay to go on that road. You have to pay a toll, right? So if you find out, hey, this person said this social media post, oh, hey, they own this fucking car and our data information's out there for everyone, they could find it. You don't think that they could just fine you from using that road? Listen, I'm not pro overtaxation. I'm not pro a shitload of taxes. That's California's fucking problem here right now. They fucking want to tax us on everything. So, but we do need some taxes, a little bit.
How many churches? Hang on. How many church? Is there only one church?
I mean, there's the body of Christ.
Yeah, that's one, right? How many is that?
I mean, there's the visible church, and then there's the
the body of Christ, though.
Church.
How many bodies of Christ are there?
Ultimately, one.
Oh, so it's a monolith.
Right. Well, the kingdom of heaven is a monolith.
Right. So it's a monolith. It sounds like it's very centralized, doesn't it? Sounds like it's very much this. We all need to be one thing,
I don't trust you
right?
with that power.
Well, I don't understand. Who's the church?
Well, the church is still men, though, right?
Oh, okay. So who is it? It's men, and how many are there supposed to be?
How
many churches are there supposed to be? One. And what's it comprised of? Men. Very strange, very strange. This God character that you're pointing out, who doesn't like this whole monopoly on things, gives us a single church for all men to join. All men to join this one thing, which creates a monopoly. In fact, I could never give you a better definition of a monopoly than everybody does this one thing. What possibly could be a better example of a monopoly than that?
I mean, I'm a Christian. I'm not sure. I don't disagree with you. The path is narrow, right? And even many who think they know God, Jesus will say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." So,
if all people joined this one church, would that create this massive power monopoly?
Well, yeah, I mean, if everybody in the world became Christian, then
The
I mean,
thing
you
that you
could say it
want?
became a monopoly.
Yeah,
Well,
the thing
yeah,
that you want? So wait, so let
right.
me just
But you can't put
get
the
this
cart.
right.
Hold
Let
on.
me get this right, Jacob. You want everybody in the world to join this monopoly, creating the largest monopoly of force in the history of the world. That's your libertarian solution to the crisis of planet. I just want to make sure I got
That's
that
not my.
clear. Is
Hold
that
on. No, no, no,
correct?
no, no. No, we're moving the goalposts here. I'm not
Oh,
saying
I
that
don't
that's
think we
my.
are.
You're conflating what I want with what I'm actually prescribing in terms of what is realistic.
Why wouldn't
So
you
yeah, what do
prescribe
I
what you
want?
want?
Well, I mean, you can have lofty goals, but that doesn't mean that's what I think is realistically going to happen.
Yeah, okay, but that's a descriptive is. We're talking about ought. You're saying people
Right.
ought to all be Christians, right?
Okay, I think we should start with the idea that we should make as many Christians as possible,
So
that we should be
everybody ought to
growing
be
the
a
kingdom of
Christian?
God.
Everybody ought to be a Christian?
Yeah, I don't
Oh,
think we
okay,
should
so
use force to
everybody ought
accomplish
to
that
be a
goal.
Christian, and if everybody ought to be a Christian, everybody
I said that in my opening
did,
statement. I said the
and yeah,
prescription for the
right, right, and if
unsaved is to
everybody
become saved.
became a Christian, right, you would have the largest monopoly on of force on planet Earth, correct?
I mean, sure. I mean, that's almost what the Bible describes, that we're going to have I mean, not getting into eschatology, but there'll be
Mm-hmm.
a reign with Christ with his body. Sure.
Super,
When that day
super,
comes.
well, super weird. So you would agree that this would have to come in stages, right? Like 50% of planet Earth was Christian, then 60% of planet Earth was Christian, then 70% was Christian, et cetera, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of an amillennialist than a post-millennialist, although I'm an optimistic amillennialist. So I'm not sure that we will have this incremental move to 100% and then usher in, the physical kingdom on earth. If that happens, great. I'm not sure it's going to be exactly like that, but if it
Okay, okay.
happens,
Well,
that would be
let's phrase
fine.
it a different way. Let's assume right now 10% of planet Earth were Christians, right? Let's just assume it. It's hypothetical, Jacob. I'm not saying it's true, just hypothetical. We're going to assume 10% of planet Earth are Christians. Would you want it to be 20%?
Absolutely,
Would you want it to be 30%?
absolutely.
Okay, so if incrementally it went tomorrow from 10%, hypothetically, to 20%, thus doubling the amount of force that it could apply, you would want that, wouldn't you?
I would want the increase of Christianity. Sure. Yeah.
And would those Christians then be the people who were in your government? And
Sure.
when they were in your government, would they be creating your
I'm not
policies?
against, like I said in my intro, I'm not against Christian government, but I think we have to
Oh,
get into the details of how that's defined.
sure, sure,
So,
sure, sure. I get it. I get it. I get it. But you would want all of your government to be Christians then.
sure, yeah,
And you would want everybody inside of your government who applied force to be Christians, wouldn't you?
yes,
Okay, great. So then what we have established is that Jacob, the libertarian, wants Christians to have a complete and total monopoly on all force on planet Earth if he can do it. This is some real mind-blowing libertarianism that you got going on here, Jacob. You have really cracked the code with this one, brother. I wish I had been able to go back in time and apply that I was also a libertarian who believed in a uniform singular church as a prescription for everyone on planet Earth. I'm sure that I wouldn't have gotten laughed out of the room at all.
yeah.
But
Again,
anyway,
you're,
go
you're still
ahead.
moving. You're still moving the goalposts from. You're asking me, do I want more Christians, and then would that consequently mean more Christians in government, and
Yes, I'm
therefore,
sorry that there's
then you jump
logical
to the.
entailments. Those are logical entailments, Jacob.
So
That's
so Andrew,
correct.
so are you saying you don't want more Christians, and therefore to create more Christians in government?
No.
Okay, then what is your prescription?
Well, I mean, my prescription, what I've always said is that well, maybe I misunderstood your question. Say your question again.
So, I mean, because honestly, I mean, I've heard you describe yourself as a Christian nationalist, but I know that's not
Mhm.
like one thing. People believe different things. But
Yeah,
how I've heard
I
most
caught. I
Christian
think what I thought you said was, would you recommend that less people became or more people became Christian? I said yes, but maybe that's not what you asked. So what did you actually ask?
I asked, you would want more people to become Christian, and therefore more people in your government to be Christian,
Yeah.
right?
And I want all those force applicators to be governed by Christians. And if they're
Sure.
moral men, I don't really give a shit how big the government gets. I don't really care if they have a monopoly on force. And I don't
I
really care if you cannot
I
defend yourself
I
adequately
think
against those
I think
moral men.
I mean, yeah, listen, I'm sitting here in agreement with that. I mean, listen, like I guess I would definitely want a Christian government. I would want more people ruling government, I mean, it's a no-brainer. At least for me, a Christian and such, someone who believes in Christian ethics, someone who believes in God. Yes, absolutely. To me, it's a no-brainer. I know people are going to hate on that and say, well, and spurg out, but what better system is there? Like, really, what better system is there?
I think if we have devout Christians following biblical principles in government, that they will use force to uphold property rights, and I don't see a biblical justification for initiating force against non-violent.
Yeah, but
sinners.
what makes that libertarian? That makes that centralized power again. That's all you're saying is that if Christians held centralized power, that they would enforce property rights with centralized power. Yeah, I agree. What's your point?
Well, I mean, I think you're defining libertarianism in a different way than I am.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think we just went over it ad nauseum. Decentralization of power over to limited property rights with smaller
I think we
government.
would
That is what you said.
So I don't think there would be one. There would still be different government across the world, and they would all be different Christian. There'd be a Christian government, and I ideally wouldn't want a American government. I'd probably want it more granular than that. So, like I live in Pennsylvania, so I'd want a Pennsylvanian government that is Christian that would be neighboring with the Maryland government that is.
Would they all be
part?
part? Well, but feasibly, if you could, would they all be part of the one truth body of Christ? In Pennsylvania and in Maryland.
Those are different, but those are different. You have the sphere of the church, and then
that's really weird. Because if you had localized leadership, you would have things like bishops, and you would have clergy who would cross over these states, and they would make like cross-state policy, right? They would make cross-state prescriptions for how morality should be run. And then, well, before you knew it, Jacob, they would be working together and uniting with each other in order to continue to spread their reach so that more people became part of that one church, right?
We should be growing the church, absolutely.
Right. So what happens is all you're doing is saying this. Here's your entire position. Andrew, I want a centralized authority of moral Christian men who then go on to take over the entirety of the United States and rule it as moral people. That's your actual position.
Right. I think we're just disagreeing that you think that's not commensurate with libertarianism.
It's not. It's not libertarianism. What is libertarianism then? Is it big monopoly government unified under a single religion? Is that libertarianism?
Well, no, I've already
Jacob?
said I would. No, because you keep yours that the church would be the government, and I'm saying no, the governments would be separate from the church. The church would interact with the government.
Nope, not possible. You cannot, if you're part of a single unified body of Christ. Go ahead, man.
So yes, the body of Christ as the church, yes, would be like in a spiritual sense as the body of Christ governing that nation, so to speak, if it was the majority.
And
Christian
where does
nation.
culture come from?
Culture comes from people.
Comes from theology. Culture's downwind of theology, right. And government's downwind of culture. So you're saying that the entire culture and the entire monopoly of force, the entire foundational root for your ideology is a singular unified religion among men who have a monopoly.
But there would still be
force,
different institutions. There would still be.
Why? No, so what? How could you have a different institution and be part of one body?
They would be part of one body in a Christian sense, in a biblical sense of being one body of Christ.
Yeah.
But then, in terms of what happens in human society, you would have, you'd still have different spheres of and institutions of human government and courts and things like that, and they wouldn't be part of just one universal church across the entire nation.
I think that they would. I think that everything which informed all of those judges and everybody else's morality would be that one unified church. And they would risk a penalty of excommunication should they govern in such a way that one unified church didn't like, right? Almost like checks and balances in a way.
Yeah, I find it unlikely that it would be one church. I mean, like you could say
no. I'm saying let's just assume for a second that it's almost logically impossible. Not quite, but almost. Like it's never going to happen as a descriptive is. That is what you want to happen, though.
It would be great if all of the theological divides between Christians were solved. We became one unified body. Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to see the full debate, I have a link in the description below. But what did you guys think? How did you think Andrew Wilson did in this? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Please give my video a like if you liked it. You'll be helping me out a lot. If you really liked it, please consider subscribing to my channel. That'll also be helping me out a lot. If you want to see more Andrew Wilson debates, I got more Andrew Wilson content on the screen for you to binge on, as well as a channel full of more content that I think you guys will enjoy.